Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman, and this week I'm joined by a special guest host. John Kelly's not able to make it this weekend, but we are instead joined by my man, NarcoCopMMA. You may know him as the host of his Contender Series show on Monday nights. He does great work with Contender Series. He also hosts the Lambo Plays podcast on, I think it is Friday nights. Narco, it's your first time on the show. First time we've ever actually done a show together, but a lot of common friends. We talked through fights together before. Excited to have you on, my man, and it should be an exciting UFC 267 fight week. 15 fights going down in Abu Dhabi on Saturday night. How are you doing, my man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me, Jonah. I'm filling in big shoes here, so hopefully I come through for people in chat and stuff. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And we see we're in the Halloween spirit over there. You're rocking the little Yoshi head costume over there. So definitely we're in the Halloween spirit. Speaking of Halloween, the card is, I guess, on Halloween Eve on the 30th. John is going to be at the card in Abu Dhabi on Fight Island for UFC 267. He should be back next week. It is obviously big shoes to fill, but we wouldn't have hit you up if I didn't think you were capable of doing it. So we do have 15 fights this weekend, including 2 title fights, 2 5-round fights. The bantamweight title is on the line, or I suppose the interim title is what we're calling it, is on the line between Petr Yan and Corey Sandhagen in the co-main event, and then obviously the main event for the light heavyweight strap. We got Jan Blachowicz defending his belt against Glover Teixeira. So we do have 15 fights. I want to go relatively quickly here and get it done. Hopefully we can stick to about 90 minutes, but it's hard with 15 fights. I know we're both passionate guys, but let's not waste too much time. Let's get right into the fights here. First up, we got Tagir Ulanbekov making his second fight in the UFC. He's minus 370, $9.4 thousand on DraftKings. He takes on Alan Nascimento, making his UFC debut. Nascimento comes back pretty big underdog here. He's plus 305, $6.8 thousand on DK. And Narco, I will let you go first here. Ulanbekov, UFC debut, a win over Bruno Silva, a win that has kind of aged pretty well since then. He was a big favorite at the time over Bruno Silva, but since then, Silva's come back, gotten some wins. So Ulanbekov, only one fight, but it was a successful one. And then Nascimento, this is a guy who I'm honestly having trouble capping, right? Like, he fought on the Contender Series in Brazil against Raulian Paiva, split decision loss, then doesn't fight for like 3 years, comes back, gets a quick submission. He now is on the biggest proving ground in the sport. First fight on UFC 267. So talk to me here. Any play for you in our first fight of the night?
So when I kept this fight, I actually really like what I see from Ulanbekov. Guy is really long for this division, long frame, long arms, good kicking game. This guy has it all, to be honest. Like, he has nice body lock takedowns, good trips. His striking, he's got a really good jab. His cardio's on point. You saw it in that fight versus Silva. That was a high-paced fight where, he kept up with Silva, like you mentioned, that win there has, even though it was a close fight, that win really aged well based on what Silva's been doing lately. He's just been, blasting through guys. So the only concern, with him is, he hasn't fought a little over a year, but he's also pulled out. Whether it was, I don't know, visa issues, injuries, I don't know what the case is, but I mean, twice he pulled out against Nicolau and then once against Tyson Nam. But I will say is Ulanbekov trains with the best people, man. This guy is in that Nurmagomedov camp, and this guy trains with the best of the best. So, and you see it in his game, right? He's really solid everywhere. On the other side with Nascimento, I don't hate what I see from him either. This guy is also training with really high level guys at Shootbox Diego Lima. He trains Oliveros from their Almeida. These UFC fighters are there, so he's getting good training over there. And this is another guy that has a long frame also. I think this is going to be the first time Ulanbekov is going to face somebody that's kind of his size in this division. The one thing I can say with Nascimento is this guy he's a Muay Thai black belt, but if you look at his record, this guy's getting submission after submission, right? So he's a good grappler, and his striking is, I would call it okay. I like more of his kicking game, right? He's got a nice kicking game, but The big flaw with this guy is he's very, very hittable, and you see it in that Paiva fight. He gets hit a lot. Kind of wild and sloppy at times when he's getting into these exchanges. But another guy that has good cardio, like that Paiva fight was very, very high paced, and he kept up there in a close fight. And that kind of like close loss to Paiva is kind of aging well too, if you ask me, because Paiva has been looking good too recently. So with that being said, like I can't honestly, take this Ulanbekov side at minus, 300 and, 400 now. Sorry, he's minus 400. It's kind of getting ridiculous. It's kind of making me want to bet Nascimento, but like he's so hittable, and I don't think he's going to stop Ulanbekov because Ulanbekov is extremely tough. The one thing I can mention is both guys are extremely tough. So if there was anything I would look at here, maybe fight goes to decision, something like that. But if I was to pick a side, I do like the cleaner boxing, the overall cleaner game from Ulanbekov.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You mentioned the fight to go to decision. I see a consensus line about minus 160 in the market right now for this fight to go the full 15 minutes. I liked your breakdown there, Narco. One thing I'll mention that stood out to me in that Bruno Silva fight is the one flaw I saw in Ulanbekov's game is he really does not check leg kicks at all, and he kind of wore the damage of leg kicks. I will say he appears to be a durable fighter, and I like what you said about the loss for Nascimento against Paiva aging well. Like you talk about the Bruno Silva win for Ulanbekov aging well. Raulian Paiva, this guy was on Contender Series. We never know what to expect. Now the whole roster is coming out of Contender Series, but like Raulian Paiva is a solidified top 15 guy at 125 pounds. It was a competitive fight. I thought there was a clear winner. Nascimento got hit cleanly often in that fight, but I do think he has what it takes to kind of win fights at the UFC level. The line is probably wide. I feel that way about a lot of these like European Russian fighters who are fighting with the OVs at the end of their name this week. You're certainly paying a little bit of an extra tax in the betting market, I think, but I'll pick Ulanbekov. I expect him to win, but not a spot where I'd feel super comfortable tossing him in parlays as a minus 400 favorite or anything like that. I do think the line could be getting a little bit wide at this point, but no action for me on the first fight of the night. Let's move on. Go ahead. Anything?
No, I said awesome.
Okay.
I just want to mention one more thing I didn't mention with Nascimento. He also had a really close loss. I don't know if you watched the fight against Mutoya. Who's also he's a rising guy. He's fought really good guys. Close fights with some really good guys. So and that fight he lost split decision and honestly could have went either way. So like his losses recently have been really close against good guys. So you can't completely discount this guy here in his UFC debut.
Yep, solid points all around there. Let's move on to the second fight of the night. We got Dimir Ismagulov, who's someone who a lot of people seem to have pretty high hopes for in terms of a long-term ceiling in his division. He's a minus 275 favorite this weekend, $8.7 thousand on DK against Magomed Mustafayev, who comes back plus 235 is our dog. He's 7.5K. I'll go first here, Narco. I don't have a ton on this fight. It's a pass for me in the betting market. I think Dimir Ismagulov is a solid fighter, but I think he's a tough fighter to back, especially with the market the way it has been on him. We've seen this guy as a big favorite time and time again, and I think he's a solid favorite, a solid fighter, I should say. Favorite is just kind of a word that comes to mind when you think of him. He has a solid jab, works behind it, has shown the ability to take opponents down, but he kind of wins on thin margins, right? Like he isn't really blowing anyone out. Like against really low level competition, we see him go out there, land multiple takedowns and blow guys out, but he's a little bit low volume. He's much more of a technically skilled fighter than a guy who will like spam volume and really clearly get ahead of his opponents. Like I would say Ismagulov is the kind of guy where if you're watching with a more casual MMA viewer, they may not like appreciate him for as skilled technically as he might be to someone who watches more MMA. And if you're watching with someone who watches a ton of MMA, they see what this guy's doing in terms of the technical striking. He's certainly someone with a lot of skill. And then Mustafayev, on the other hand, this guy is very flashy in terms of his striking, right? Like everything he's throwing usually comes with a spin and a kick at the end of it. He has a first round knockout against Rafael Fiziev, which is obviously, speaking of wins that have aged well, that has aged well. He put him out in his debut, but For me, Ismagulov should be a favorite in this spot, but he's one of those guys who he doesn't really win in blowout fashion that often. It's hard to lay a price here like minus 275, especially when, we saw him get dropped his last time out. Mustafayev certainly has the power in his hands and most likely in his feet to put guys down. So I'll pick Ismagulov here. I don't really love anything in terms of the betting market. I expect the fight to go to decision. And something I wanted to mention here is with DraftKings, when we have 15 fights, we really need to be prioritizing upside fighters with super high ceilings when we're talking about these big GPPs, because a win with 70 significant strikes and a takedown is not really doing anything for you on a 15 fight slate, where it's more likely than not that 6 fighters under the salary cap are going to hit ceiling score. So we're likely, in terms of DraftKings, we're looking for guys who have a real ability to win early in fights and win with big scores on DK. I don't really know if Ismagulov brings that to the table, but Narco, maybe there's a dissenting opinion from you here. Anything from you on the second fight of the night, my man?
No, actually, you hit it on hit all the points. This Ismagulov, really good striker, really long. Very very technical and solid. Very good footwork. He can grapple when he wants to. But this guy likes to stand up. He has very good movement. I like how he works, up and down, where, he finishes combinations with lower leg kicks. The guy has it all. Very good striker. The one thing I will say with this guy is he doesn't have, or so far I haven't seen that killer instinct, right? He doesn't have that finishing instinct in him. You see before, like he did have a lot of regional stoppages, plenty of them, and some were in the third round. One he did in the fifth round. So, this guy has the cardio. He has all that, in his last fight against Alves. And I'll be completely honest, I had Alves by KO in that fight at an insane number, and I almost got it really early.
Yeah, it got close.
He hurt him. And
yeah.
What I will say is, in that last fight, it might be one of those, things that just happened, but he got kind of tired in the third, and he was kind of succumbing to the pressure of Alves. With Mustafayev, though, this guy has really, really flashy, good striking, like you mentioned, great kicking game. He also has good takedowns when he wants to use them. But with this guy, his cardio is very suspect to me because, and I will say, when you're throwing this flashy stuff, these big explosive movements, those take a lot out of your gas. And I can understand why this guy, is gassing by the third round, is tired by the third round. Another thing to think about here is Mustafayev hasn't fought in almost a year and a half, almost 2 years. He also had a fight scheduled last year sometime against Gamrot or Moyacano, and he pulled out, or I don't know what the deal was, but the fight didn't go through. But he hasn't fought for almost 2 years. The guy's getting a little up there in age too. He's not young, he's 33 years old now. So you would want to see more consistency. You would want to see more fights from this guy. But again, I think this matchup for him is not good, in the sense that Ismagulov is smart. Ismagulov is going to use his range. Ismagulov is going to be, staying out of those crazy, spinning kicks and just kind of like outpoint this guy from the outside. What I will say to look at is I kind of sprinkled a little Ismagulov round 3 plus 1400 for the reasons I mentioned, right? He has late finishes. I know he doesn't have the killer instinct, but Mustafayev gasses. And I think he's going to make Mustafayev grapple here, which is in turn going to make him tired.
I agree. There's nothing more tiring outside of maybe firing these flashy spinning kicks. Those are high output movements, like you mentioned, high energy. In baseball, we call them like max effort pitches, right? Like guys who have max effort windups and are throwing like as hard as they can. It's like a full body workout. That's exactly what it looks like when Mustafayev is like throwing these spinning 360 heel kicks, whatever he's like choosing to throw. Super taxing on the body, and grappling does the same thing. So I expect him to slow down as well. Don't hate the late KO props. I will say that if I was playing the Mustafayev side, which I'm not, I think KO, it might be a better look than the money line. I just think he's gonna have trouble winning minutes. Ismagulov is a tough guy to kind of get off against. I do think that Mustafayev, most of his success will be predicated on kind of landing one of his more flashy flashy strikes early on in the fight. Let's move on to our third fight of the night. We got Andre Petroski making his second fight in the octagon. He's minus 220, $8.6 thousand on DK. He fights Hugh Yazon, who we haven't seen in a few years, but is an underdog in this spot, plus 185, 7.6K. And Narco, what I think is the most kind of interesting thing to talk about coming into this fight. So I mentioned that Hugh hasn't fought in a few years. This is a guy who, when we did see him fight in 2017, he fought at heavyweight, and then he came back in 2018. He fought at light heavyweight. This fight, obviously, at 185 pounds. A guy we haven't seen in 3 years who's now moving down 2 weight classes from what he originally entered the UFC at. He wasn't a massive heavyweight. I think he weighed in like between 230, 235 at heavyweight, but obviously cutting down to 185 this weekend against Petroski. And I wrote Petroski up this weekend in my article that should be coming out in 2 or 3 minutes. It's scheduled to come out here on ftndaily.com. And I wrote up Petroski as one of my fighters to target on DraftKings in the mid-range. Look, this is a guy who I don't consider to be an elite prospect by kind of any stretch. He's a guy who I watched on The Ultimate Fighter. I was at his UFC debut live. Certainly a flawed fighter, and I'm sure you'll talk about that, Narco, in your breakdown of the fight. This is a guy with extremely questionable cardio. His striking does not seem fluid to me. But the one thing I will give Petroski credit for is he's a pretty strong wrestler, and he's very strong physically. I mean, this is a guy who can really dominate fights with his physicality, and I kind of worry a little bit about his physicality. You know, there's 2 ways to look at it, right? Like, he's super physically dominant, which could either help him fighting a guy who's potentially going to be bigger than him, and it can kind of level the playing field, or if he's fighting someone bigger than him, it can kind of take away one of his biggest, I don't want to say his biggest strengths, but like one of his biggest advantages over most opponents at 185 is his ability to kind of muscle them down, bully them on the ground. I'm not entirely positive he's going to get that here against Hugh, but the bottom line is, man, for those of us who have gone back and watched the tape here on Hugh Yazon at heavyweight when he fought Cyril Asker, this is a guy who got dominated in the grappling, man, taken down 4 times in less than 2 rounds, advanced position on. I believe he's submitted in the end. I mean, Petroski, for as flawed a fighter as he is, and I don't think that he's a guy who's going to go super far in the UFC, his skill set lines up well here. I'm not laying minus 220 on a guy who I think kind of has as many issues underlying as he does, but stylistically, man, I think this is a pretty good fight for Andre Petroski. I expect him to get takedowns early. I expect him to have good chances to put away the fight. If he's unable to put away Hugh, I could see a live bet potentially here on the Yazong side. But for me, nothing pre-fight, maybe a live spot on Hugh Yazong. But for the most part, I expect Andre to have early success in this fight. What say you, Narco?
I was just going to mention exactly what you said. Like, maybe look for a live spot on Hugh here after one, and depending on how Petroski looks. But, you know, if I was to say anything about this fight is please stay away from this fight. We don't know much about what Hugh's been doing yet. I know he's been out for 3 years. I know he's training over there at the UFC PI with, you know, Jiang Li. And, you know, apparently the UFC PI there told him that you need to drop to 185. You can't compete at 205 or heavyweight. So that's why he did the transformation. Maybe that's why it's taken him 3 years since his last fight, because it's a significant drop to 185, especially when you fought at heavyweight. I will say is I did see some pictures of him of recent, and the guy had like a 6-pack, looked much, much different than the guy I saw.
Right.
Yeah, he looked really good as far as, you know, shape-wise. But, you know, this guy's literally trained everywhere. This guy's been, you know, he was at Tiger Muay Thai in Thailand. The guy fought at, you know, trained at Jackson Wink for a little bit. Now he's back at the UFC PI training there. You know, he had a 10-month USADA ban. You know, I can go on and on about all this shit with this guy, but, you know, the bottom line is, when he fought at heavyweight, he got dominated in the grappling by Cyril Asker, which is a terrible look.
Right.
The very next fight, he goes out and, you know, gets dropped against Rashad Coulter, you know, gets hurt multiple times in that fight, comes back, I will give him that, in a decently close contested fight. But how does that look when you lose to a guy in Rashad Coulter who's out of the UFC? I wouldn't consider him a UFC level fighter. And now you're facing a guy in Petroski that the one big flaw that you has, Petroski's good at, right? He's really good wrestler. You does not look like he's very good, you know, defending takedowns. I will give him some credit against Asker, he was getting up, but he was constantly getting put on his ass again.
Right.
So, like you said, the red flags are there with Petrosky too, though. Like, the gas tank is not very good. He's easily hit on the feet. He's going to be the much smaller guy. So all those things considered, yeah, I mean, if you're going to play Petrosky, maybe throw in like a Petrosky, submission or round one or something like that. Other than that, I would completely stay away from this fight and maybe look to live bet Hugh.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Sometimes the best bets are the ones we don't make. So I agree with you, largely a pass for me as well. Let's move on to our next fight here. We got a pretty good fight in terms of the skill level here. We got Leron Murphy minus 300 here, 9.3K on DraftKings. He takes on Makwan Amerikani plus 250, 6.9K. Narco, I'm going to let you go first here. Leron Murphy is a guy who I'm pretty high on. He's had success at the UFC level. One thing we've seen him struggle with a little bit here, I feel like this is a common thread on the card. We just talked about Petrosky's best skill is takedowns, and he's fighting a guy who struggled to defend takedowns. The one thing we've seen Murphy struggle with a little bit was his defensive wrestling. Granted, he's fought some pretty good wrestlers, but this is a guy we've seen get put on his ass before, as you put it. And Makwan Amerikani, I mean, talk about a flawed guy in terms of cardio. This is a guy who consistently lets us down late in fights. But when we talk about guys who have really solid takedowns, I mean, maybe some of the best takedowns at the weight class, although it hasn't translated to a ton of wins. I mean, that's Makwan Amerikani. Plus 250 this weekend is intriguing to me. Do you think he has any shot to pull off the upset here against Murphy?
Yeah, again, very, very good wrestler. Wants to fight on the ground. Very good choking. The Dars, really, really nasty Dars from this guy. But again, you mentioned the same thing. Cardio is an issue with this guy. What I will say is when it comes to his striking, he's got a really, really good check right hook. He throws it a lot, and you see it over and over and over on tape. He landed it a lot against Burgos. He landed it against in his last fight against God, I'm drawing a blank. Camilla Kirk, yes.
Yep.
So he landed it in that fight. But you see how much this guy slows down after the first round, right? And I think part of it is the cardio, right? Based on part of it is the wrestling. Like this guy is really going for it. He's really trying to get you down there and submit you. That's what he wants to do. With Murphy, like I like everything I see, but yes, he does have that flaw of the takedown defense. But on the other hand, he's got good get-ups though. He's not the type of guy that you put down there and he kind of like, he sits in full guard and that's fine with him. No, this guy is trying to get up. He himself actually has good takedowns. Like I don't mind when he shoots and gets people down because his ground and pound is pretty nasty when he's on top. But overall, like the guy has a good kicking game. Guy has really good cardio that checks out to me. I think he will have a big edge here if this fight goes later. The more later this fight goes, I think he has a big edge here. What I do like here, as far as I'm not going to lay the 300. But what I do like is fight goes to decision at plus money. With two very, very durable guys. Whatever you think of Amerikani, gassing, whatever. The dude is extremely, extremely durable. He got put out by Burgos, but those were more from body shots and accumulation of body shots. But this guy takes everything. I mean, Barbosa hit this guy with the kitchen sink, and we know how hard he hits. He took almost everything. So, for me, listening to what Murphy was saying on a recent interview, he basically said, the guy asked him, he goes, "What do you think of this matchup?" And he literally said, "This is probably one of his worst matchups because of what Amerikani brings as far as wrestling. And to top it off, these guys were training partners at some time." So I just want to throw that in there. So with all that being said, fight goes to decision. Plus money is not bad at all. And if you want to look for something, another thing I want to say is plus 900 submission for Amerikani is insane.
Yep, I agree. I was going to bring that up. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but that's certainly a price that I agreed with. Speaking of the fight goes to decision, so goes to full 15. I see plus 110 as the best available price out there. Kind of see it all over the market, pretty widely available at this point. So if you agree with Narco, pretty good price, plus 110 there on the fight going the distance. I will pick Murphy in this spot. Just think he's the more well-rounded guy, man. Like I I wish Amirkhani was just a better all-around MMA fighter, because we mentioned the takedowns. Like, he is a really good takedown artist, and his front choke game goes pretty crazy. Like, that plus 900. I mean, he's gonna, if he gets you in a front headlock sequence, like, he's gonna go for the Darce almost assuredly, or some form of Darce anaconda. Like, he runs you through, like, he'll put you through the ringer in terms of front headlock chokes. Like, he is very willing to attempt them. The thing is, man, like, this guy has such trouble winning rounds when he's not on top for the entirety of the 5 minutes, right? Like, Kenwella Kirk, it's not often that you lose five or that you land 5 takedowns and are losing multiple rounds, man. Like, his striking, you mentioned the check right hook, like, it's a nice strike, but he consistently gets out volumed in fights. He doesn't have like kind of fight ending power, not even fight ending, but like big power that he could create a moment to win a round off of. You know what I mean? Like, it's tough for this guy. He really needs to either submit you, which I think he could do. Plus 900 is probably worth a shot, or he needs to lie in your guard or pass for, almost the entirety of a round, because he has trouble winning minutes outside of when he's in dominant position. So I think that Amirkhani has some tools to kind of pose issues to Murphy early on in the fight, but as it gets extended, I do think that Murphy minus 300 is pretty justified in the spot. I'll pick him to win the fight.
What I will say is, for DraftKings perspective, Murphy's probably a fade at 9,300. I don't like that, but I do like a little poke on Amirkhani at 6,900 range, because the guy will land takedowns. The guy will go for it. So at that price, you can't really go wrong, because I mean, he has that submission game. He has that wrestling to kind of get you some points. I don't expect him to win a decision, but again, you never know if he does kind of like, shore up a little bit of his cardio, which I doubt. He can win minutes as far as, getting the grappling in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is a guy who he has a high floor because of that, right? Like, he's durable and lands takedowns repeatedly. I don't have it in front of me, but I think he scored like 40 points in a loss to Kenwella Kirk, which obviously, like, 70 points in a win isn't great. A 15 fight slate, obviously, in GPPs, you need all 6 fighters to win almost assuredly, especially with 2 5-round fights. But Amirkhani, his upside comes via takedowns and via submission. So, I mean, those are 2 things that score highly on DraftKings for sure. And Murphy, I agree with you, just overpriced in terms of the upside he brings to the table, right? He's kind of more of a point fighter who we expect to have a little bit of trouble in the fight, right? Like, it's not going to I doubt he gets on top and kind of dominates from the opening bell. So I agree with those takes there in terms of DFS. Let's move on to the next fight, Narco, which is one where I honestly have not gone back and watched the tape. I've seen this guy, Gamzatov, who's the favorite here. I should introduce the fight first. Shamil Gamzatov is minus 120, which is a number that was not around earlier in this week. He was a much larger favorite throughout the weekend. Money has come in on Lord Mikhail Olizaychuk. He's now even money underdog plus 100 most places in the market. The DK prices here for Gamzatov are 8.4K. Olizaychuk comes back 7.8K. This is a fight where Gamzatov hasn't fought in a few years. Olizaychuk is someone who had some hype behind him. He's fought a decently strong strength of schedule, but has kind of not impressed in terms of his performances. I think it's safe to say that, but certainly some people in the market are buying low on him against a guy who's been inactive recently. And Narco, I have a sneaky suspicion you are one of the people leading this line movement. So talk to me here. Do you have any bet here on Gamzatov versus Olizaychuk?
I am the guy leading the line movement.
Let's go.
Correct. I actually have Lord Michael at plus 126 for a unit and a half. I'm just not impressed with this Gamzatov guy. Like, this guy hasn't fought in 2 years. He's, withdrawn three fights in a row against Oven St. Preux twice. Sorry, 4 fights in a row. So I don't know what in the world this guy is doing. He's not the typical OV guy that we know of, right? The typical grappler, extremely strong wrestler. Don't expect that, guys. This guy is not that guy. This guy spams a lot of kicks. This guy is really low volume when you watch his tape. This guy has fought, literally nobody. He went to split this decision against Abreu, who's not in the UFC anymore. And you could have probably gave it to Abreu too in that fight. But you go and look at this guy's record and who he's beaten, and, fighting these guys that, Rodney Wallace, split decision against this guy, Rodney Wallace, who is, at best a regional decent guy. And now he's facing a guy in Lord Michael that, you know what? He's not the cleanest guy. Yeah, he kind of goes crazy. But, this guy's fought way better fighters. This guy's, a 6-time UFC vet. So he's fought 6 times in the UFC. Um, he does have a lot of power. He had, he pressures a ton, and I think in his last fight where, he won against Bukowskis, it was a close fight. I don't know if he won the fight or not, but I think the size of Bukowskis gave him problems. Modestas is a big dude. He kind of couldn't get in to kind of land his punches. They were all falling short. He did land some here and there, but don't get it twisted, man. This guy hits very hard. This guy, he wants to blast you out of there. And then on the other side, like, Gamzatov, he's there spamming kicks. I just don't see a lot that I like from this guy. I'll be honest with you. He's 14-0, but the O is going to go. And I think it's going to go to, on Saturday with Lord Michael. And whether he gets him out of there or not, I'm not sure. He might not get him out of there just for the fact that Gamzatov is more defensive. He's not throwing a lot of volume, might not open himself up for counters or straight lefts, but the volume is going to be there from Lord Michael, and he's just going to win minutes. I don't see this guy Gamzatov winning minutes unless somehow he decides to grapple, but you just don't see it on tape, and I'm not going to assume he's going to grapple.
Yeah. I think that's a fair assessment here. I'll give you credit on the closing line value here. I actually did want to, I had in my notes that the best available price was a plus 126 still available at FanDuel Sportsbook, but it looks like as of like 12 minutes ago, that was hit pretty hard. It's down to even money now there. I see some plus 120s in the legal book market. I see it on the Unibet and Bet River skin. So for those of you guys looking to get in on Lord McCullough, I think the time is kind of moving away from us now. So I would get it in a plus 120 kind of before he moves towards that even money. In terms of DraftKings, I think that Mikhail Olizechek here might pick up some ownership because we have a lot of big underdogs on this card, right? Like we look at the card, we see Hamza Chimaya, who we'll get to, is in the minus 600 range. We have Islam Makhachev, who has been at minus 800 throughout fight week. Like these are guys who obviously their opponents in Legion Liang and Dan Hooker. We'll talk about whether it's warranted or not, but these guys are big underdogs, man. Like plus 500, plus 600, low implied chances to win the fight. Those guys aren't going to garner a lot of ownership on DK. There are not a lot of underdogs, at least for me personally, that I'm super excited to play. Mikhail Olizechuk is someone who's priced at 7.8K, but may end up closing a favorite in this spot, or at the very least to pick him. It looks like that's the way we're trending towards. So I actually think he's going to pick up some ownership, and it's just kind of a spot where I don't feel super confident. And if I feel like too much of the field on a 15 fight slate is going to kind of move and gravitate towards that Olizechuk value, with him being slightly underpriced compared to his Vegas odds, that's just kind of a spot where I'm not actively looking to fade it. Like if I end up with him on my DraftKings rosters, it's fine, but it's not a spot where I'm like rushing to kind of get overweight compared to the field as I have been in some spots where we kind of have this situation on DraftKings with fighters who are clearly overpriced compared to the closing line. All right, let's move on to the next fight here. We got Eliza Zaleski dos Santos minus 235. He's a significant favorite here over a guy making his UFC debut. We got Benoit St Dennis plus 200 as the underdog here, 7.7K. And this is a guy in St Dennis who it's tough to find footage on him, Narco. I don't know about you, but I mean, I couldn't find anything from his last 3 fights. The last time I saw him was like in early 2020. Have you found anything from this guy in the last 3 years?
Yeah, I watched them all actually. They're all on, well, whether you have it or not, but they're all on Fight TV.
Okay.
So if you have a membership to Fight TV, they're on there. All the Brave cards are on there. So yeah, you get to watch him in those guys. He's fighting. I mean, these guys that he's fighting, I know they have winning records. They have decent records, but watching them, they're not really that good.
Yeah.
And, he kind of like, watching this guy, this guy was here. The one thing I want to mention right away, which is very, very important to know, is this guy started training MMA. Take a guess, Jonah. When do you think this guy started training MMA?
How old is he right now?
Fresh, green.
Like you want an age or how many years ago? What do you
want?
want?
How many years ago?
Well, he's from France, right? And like MMA wasn't even legal there. I'll take the under on like 7 years that he's been training.
I mean, 2017, this guy started training MMA after he got out of the special forces he was in the special forces in France in the army. And you watch this guy and he just wants to get the fight to the ground. Like this guy is straight up wants to get the fight to the ground. Um, but his jujitsu is okay at best because he's getting reversed a lot. He's going from top to bottom position in these fights I'm watching, especially the fight I watched against Mario Said. He got, reversed. He went on bottom 2 different times. Multiple times against in different fights. He almost got he got heel hooked
Yeah.
multiple times. So, he's a blue belt in BJJ. How good can you possibly be when you started training MMA in 2017? Like, you can't be any high level guy. I think Zaleski dos Santos has him covered everywhere here, especially the striking. Man, this guy is too green to be coming in and fighting a guy like Dos Santos. And you can actually make a case that Dos Santos won his last fight against a really, really, really high level striker in the King of Kung Fu Salikov. So,
Yeah.
just go back and look at the wins for, knocking out Sean Strickland that everybody's scared of now. Lyman Good is a good win. Max Griffin, Luigi Venjamini. Alex Konchenko, he lost to Lee in the third round, got knocked out, but a really close competitive fight. This guy is, higher up there in the UFC, and we got this new guy in MMA coming in to fight this guy, and this guy's only minus 210. Why is that? This line is so off to me. I honestly capped this fight at like minus 350, 400 for Dos Santos, and I jumped on him at minus 210, and it's still there. I really don't understand, and I think this line probably closes probably after people start watching these Dennis fights. It might go to 400.
I agree with you. I hadn't been able to watch some of his recent fights. I'm going to go back and look into that. But like from the fights I did see, I did put in the time. I watched this kid fight. I mean, he gets takedowns, gets reversed. He'll take someone's back and then he gets turned into, super easily, ends up on bottom, and he'll escape with some form of like a knee bar or something like that. And he's getting tapped. So, shout out to the kid for making the UFC. But like, I don't know, like Alessi Dos Santos, my thoughts throughout the week have kind of been, he's a tough guy to kind of trust at minus 200. He doesn't have any one skill where he's like super dominant and you trust him to kind of go out there and implement that game plan. But at some point, man, and we've seen this a lot throughout the pandemic, like you go back and you look, we have these kids coming into the UFC, and Leski Dos Santos, I mean, this guy's an 11-fight UFC veteran. You mentioned the guys he has wins over. You mentioned the guys who he's been in there with, likely coming off a win against Muslim Salikov. Like, those are good wins to have on your record. And I mean, he's just to the point where, like, this is a UFC vet, has 11 fights in the promotion, has been fighting some top 15, top 10 guys. I kind of struggle to see a path for St. Dennis in terms of the stylistic matchup, but also in terms of just a skill level across the board. Like, I do kind of just think Dos Santos has him covered everywhere. So it isn't a bet that I've made yet, just because I was a little wary of laying this price on a guy like Dos Santos, like I mentioned. But I don't know. I like your bet. I see a minus 210 still out there on FanDuel Sportsbook. I think I might join you there. It's hard this week because there's a lot of lines that are, minus 200 or higher. Like, they're certainly not a lot of not a lot of fights that are expected to be competitive, I should say, according to the betting odds. So sometimes you got to eat a little bit of chalk here, or get a big underdog price. I do think that Dos Santos is one of the safer spots on the card. Obviously, some massive favorites, but I do feel confident that he just kind of has his opponent covered everywhere here. So I will likely take the plunge, join you for a 1-unit play at minus 210 on the Dos Santos side here.
One more thing to mention is this guy has never been to decision either. So however you want to look at that, whether it be, late round stoppage for Dos Santos, but I think Dos Santos is life for a KO even here.
Yeah, I agree. I think a KO is probably his most likely way of winning for sure. And I would not be surprised to see it come to fruition whatsoever. Let's move on to our next fight here, where speaking of some laying some chalk, this is a spot that I kind of grappled with, no pun intended, about laying the chalk kind of throughout the week. We got Albert Duraev, who's making his UFC debut here. He's minus 360, $9,200 on DK against Roman Kopylov, who has one UFC fight, was submitted by Carl Roberson. He's plus 295, 7K on DraftKings. And Narco, look, you're the Dana White Contender Series guy here. You got the show every week. You were talking pre-show about how there's just free money to be made in that market that I'm apparently ignoring every week. Duraev was a guy who I went back, I saw his fight, pretty dominant on the show, man. Like, he went out there, took his opponent's back, pretty much dominated off of the first takedown. Like, this is a guy who hadn't fought in a few years before Contender Series, right? Like, there was a 3 or 4 year period where he didn't fight. But you go back and you look at Duraev, I mean, his losses, I know he has 3 losses. They're all by knockout, which can sometimes be a little bit concerning when you're looking at a wrestler. It's like, well, is this guy really drawing dead on the feet every single time? But his losses really have not aged poorly. I think he's a decent striker. One loss to Tokov, who is in Bellator right now, hasn't lost in like 5 or 10 years. And then we have Ramazan Ameev, who, say what you want about Ramazan Ameev, I personally think he's one of the more boring fighters in the UFC. But like, the guy's being priced at minus 300 against Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts a week or two ago, right? And I know he lost the fight, but like, there's no shame in losing those fights 9-10 years ago. This is a guy who I think is probably the real deal in Duraev. I'm not going to say he's going to come out and be world champion or anything like that. But Roman Kopylov, undefeated coming into the UFC, and then was like thoroughly outgrappled by Carl Roberson in that debut fight. Carl Roberson, you know, if you've watched him fight before, he's the guy who is usually on the other hand, the catching and beating in terms of the grappling. So I think that Duraev comes out here and kind of just dominates if he's able to get this fight to the ground, which I expect him to be able to. I saw a minus 300 available on a Fox bet this morning. I'm considering laying the chalk here with minus 300. I just think it's a really good stylistic matchup for Duraev. Not usually someone who lays minus 300 on guys making their debut, but the last time I almost did that was Hamza Chimaya, and he turned out to be to be pretty good. So, Narco, am I crazy, man? You probably know more about this Duraev guy than I am. Am I crazy to be thinking about laying the chalk here in this spot against Roman Kopylov?
I wouldn't call you crazy, but you know, me personally, I don't like laying these 300s. You know, I try to stay like that 250 range at most. It's just I've been burned way too many times, and Blades comes to mind really quick for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, I think this, you know, another route you can look at it is if you're thinking that Duraev gets done what you think he's going to get done, then guess what happens on the ground? He's going to stop this guy. And Duraev is a mean son of a bitch when he gets you down, man. Like this guy, you know, you hear Sean Strickland talking about this guy, and they asked Sean Strickland, how is this guy? Said this is the toughest motherfucker on the ground in the whole gym at Extreme Couture. Like he gives them hell. And for Sean Strickland to say that, a guy as big of his head as he does, so
Yeah.
he might actually be dominating Sean Strickland on the ground for him to say that. So what I will say is this guy is really, really strong, man. When he gets a hold of you, you're going down. And when you're down there, you're not getting up, man. All these fights, like when he grounds people, he is just smashing them. And, you know, you're talking about the knockouts. Those are 7-8 years ago. I don't put a lot of stock into stuff like that, you know, 7 or 8 years ago. This guy's, you know, he hadn't fought for a while, but now he fights, you know, he trains at Extreme Couture. He trained with Hamza Chimaya in this training camp. He trained with Sean Strickland. So he's getting very good rounds against, you know, very good grapplers if you're talking about Chimaev. So I would love to see the grappling going on with those two. But yeah. And then we're talking about his, you know, on the feet, you know, the guy is very, very serviceable on the feet too. I like what I see. You know, he throws with power. He throws very good low leg kicks, which are probably going to be a big problem for Kopylov here after watching that Roberson fight where he absolutely chewed his leg up. You know, this guy's been 5 rounds. His cardio has checked out. You know, he is just extremely strong. And you know, you go back and watch Kopylov, and this guy was supposed to be, you know, a big up and comer, and he came into the UFC, and you know, completely, you know, flopped against Roberson. You know, he looked terrible for 2 rounds, and then brought it on in a third. He came on in a third, and then you see Roberson's like, okay, I'll take you down, and just took him down, took his back, and it was not a good look on a guy against Roberson, guys. So now he's facing a guy and a guy that loves to go down there. He loves to smash you. He loves to choke you. It's just bad news for him here. And for me to look at something where I don't want to lay minus 360, how about a minus, you know, 120, 125 inside the distance for Duria? Because if we think that he's going to get this guy to the ground, Kopylov doesn't have much of a ground game, so he's going to be in big, big trouble if he's down there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a decent way to play the fight. I will mention, I think DraftKings Duraev is a super strong play. There are guys with bigger names who are bigger favorites on the card. Makhachev comes to mind. I think this guy, Duraev, is more likely to land takedowns early and finish the fight in the first round. The way DK pricing is with a 15-fight slate is we have guys priced all the way up at 9.6K for Islam Makhachev, the most expensive fighter on the slate. And then conversely, we have guys like, Dan Hooker, his opponent, are priced in the mid 6K range. I think that there are lineup builds. I haven't really started messing around with making teams. I think there are builds where you can go with like a Hamza Chimaya at 9.5K and then Duraev as your second most expensive fighter at 9.2K. And I'm not sure how popular they'll be because I imagine that, Jan Blachowicz is a pretty massive favorite in a 5-round fight in the main event at $9,000, who's cheaper than Duraev. I expect him to garner more ownership. And I think this is kind of a spot where you can kind of pay up for contrarian builds and kind of pay for two guys above $9,000. And I think that I think Duraev obviously makes for a strong DraftKings play. I expect him to get the job done inside the distance this weekend. Narco, it sounds like we are in agreement. Let's move on to our next fight here. We got Zubara Tokugawa. He's a minus 160 favorite. This is a guy who opened wider than minus 160. Some money has come in on his opponent throughout fight week in Ricardo Ramos. He's plus 140 at this point, 7.9K for Ramos on DraftKings. And look, we got 15 fights, so we can't take forever here. I'm going to keep my breakdown for this one short before kicking over to you, Narco. I mean, Tokugawa to me is someone who he's training with some of the best guys in the world, but to me, he's just not really on the same level as a lot of the guys he gets compared to. I don't think he's very good, man. Like his striking is very, very low output. He struggles to throw anything. His takedowns are pretty empty. And what I mean by that is he's not the type of guy who's really passing. I mean, he almost had like Leron Murphy's back essentially in the third round of their last fight. And Herb is yelling at him to advance position. Like he's to the point where he's doing nothing but stalling guys out. And, that might work to win fights, but I think the guy's poor cardio. I think he's a low volume striker. I think his takedowns are, he is a decent wrestler, but like at the same time, man, Ricardo Ramos is a guy who I struggle to back, right? Like he's a flashy striker. We've seen him get knockouts with like spinning back elbows and stuff like that. But his striking differential in terms of the stats is pretty poor. This is a guy who gets hit more than he hits his opponents, and he's able to wrestle guys like Bill Algeo, but I kind of have the opinion that he's probably not going to be able to take down the Dagestani fighter this weekend in Zubara Tokugawa. So it's a pass for me, man. Tokugawa, never a guy I'm going to lay chalk on, but Ricardo Ramos is just a tough guy for me to get behind, even at an underdog price like plus 140 here. Narco, anything for you on this fight between Tokugawa and Ramos?
No, I don't like both fighters, to be honest. I'm not impressed with either one of them. Tokugawa, like, yeah, he throws with power, but they're like weird, like single shots. Not many combinations from this guy. When he gets you down, he has like no control. Like, let's guys get back up really quickly. He's not the typical, Dagestani, given that Dagestani handcuff and keep you on the ground and pound you. He's just not like that. He's very low volume, bad cardio. You name it. Like, I don't, laying 160 with this guy is a no-no for me. And on the other side, I'm not even impressed with Ramos at all, to be honest. Like, I can't back this guy even at a plus money here when he's fighting a guy that I don't like either. But, this guy doesn't have great takedown defense. His cardio is also kind of like a question mark to me.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the best of cardio. His striking is okay. I guess his best game is like his jiu-jitsu, right? And, I don't think he's going to sub Tokugawa.
Right. It's an uphill battle for him.
Yeah. So it's like, I just don't want to lay anything anywhere here. Low volume versus a guy that like throws a lot of kicks and stuff. Nothing for me. If I was to pick a side, I'd probably take Tokugawa just based on him maybe landing some takedowns and winning minutes.
Yeah, I'm picking Tokugawa. I think minus 160 is probably a similar price. I don't hate if you got in on Ramos at a bigger price. I mentioned that price has kind of come down throughout the week, but I'm with you, Narco. It's not a spot where I really feel confident backing either guy. And I'm a firm believer, we're backing prices in a market and not specific fighters, but like these are just two guys who are tough to trust with your money. And there's a lot of good spots this weekend, man. I don't think there's any reason to force it.
And no DFS for either guy, to be honest. I don't see a lot of finishing upside.
Yeah, this is a fight. I mean, people make jokes all the time about like the beer run. I mean, this card starts at like 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. It's 8:30 for me. Narco, I think it's like 9:30 in the morning for you. I mean, like if you need to go like for a lunch break or something, like this might be the fight to miss. I anticipate it to be pretty slow pace and not one that is especially exciting, but maybe we're proven wrong on Saturday morning. Let's move on to our next fight, which is actually a matchup that I think is pretty exciting to talk about and a fight that I expect to kind of be widely debated throughout like the MMA Twitter universe this weekend. I've seen people on both sides. We got Amanda Ribas, a minus 155 favorite, coming off of a knockout loss to Marina Rodriguez. She takes on Verna Jandiroba, who comes back plus 135, 8K for Verna on DraftKings. And look, this is a matchup where Amanda Ribas in the past has been this fighter who we kind of had some suspicions that she was a little bit chinny, but she was, she throws good output on the feet. She's a good grappler. We've seen her win fights over girls like Mackenzie Dern. She goes out there, dominates round one against Marina Rodriguez her last time out, gets knocked out, pretty much like stopped cold almost, which we don't really see often in women's MMA. The stoppage really poor in that fight, but was clearly hurt on multiple occasions against Marina Rodriguez. And, there's no real shame in that. Rodriguez is a great striker, but what's most interesting here, I guess, is now we're looking at Amanda Ribas, who's a favorite, mostly baked into the fact that she's going to be the better striker here against Verna Jandiroba, who I actually expect to have a grappling advantage here. Jandiroba is someone who I think is a pretty good defensive grappler in terms of working off the bottom and turning her defense into offense. And I actually think she's a better wrestler than Amanda Ribas as well. So I'm kind of tempted to bet Verna Jandiroba. I've been trying to kind of not listen to people's opinions on the fight throughout the week because I know that there's a clear kind of divide between people who I trust and people who I like to talk about fights with. So Narco, you have the honor of being the first person I've kind of listened to their take all week on this fight. I kind of like Jandiroba as an underdog at plus 135. I haven't bet her. But I'm a little bit curious. Like, what do you think here? Because if this fight stays standing, I will say Jandiroba's striking looked much improved her last time out, but I do think that Ribas is the better striker here. So if Verna can't land takedowns, I think she might be in some form of trouble. What do you think about this matchup, man? I'm kind of curious where your head is at.
Close your ears.
No, I want to hear.
So I like Ribas in this spot. I think it's a really buy low spot on her. I think she's actually the better grappler. I think she's actually the better striker. And I think the striking is kind of a bigger gap than the grappling for me. Because Jandiroba is really good defensively grappling. Like she's really good even from bottom. But again, Ribas is good in the grappling realm herself. Like she's not no slouch, especially if she's on top. And, what I see from Jandiroba in the striking, what concerns me is the Mackenzie Dern fight, man. Mackenzie Dern charging forward, throwing punches, and seeing Jandiroba at one point turn her back from getting punched is a horrible, horrible look. And, you're talking about Mackenzie Dern there, and Ribas is a much, much better striker than Mackenzie Dern is. Everybody is, I think this line is completely different if she doesn't get knocked out by Marina Rodriguez. Even if she loses, I think this line is different if it goes to the decision. But because people are starting to say she's chinny, she's been knocked out twice, Jandiroba is not the girl to knock her out. I don't see much power coming from this girl. She has a decent clinch game, I guess. But again, Ribas is very strong herself. Like I don't see where Jandiroba's advantage is here. Yes, if she gets on top, I do see it, but I don't see her getting on top. I don't see her landing takedowns. I just think Ribas pretty much, if she wants it standing, she keeps it standing. And if she wants to get it to the ground, I think she can take her to the ground. And that's the issue. I don't think Ribas is going to stop Jandiroba. She's extremely tough.
Yeah.
So I took the Ribas by decision at plus 130. You're turning a minus 155 in the most likely outcome of her win condition, which is decision.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think she's get the submission here over Jandiroba, and I don't know if she has the power in her hands to stop her. Quick shout out to the people who got on Fight Goes to Decision. That line opened this week at like a minus 150 range. It's up to minus 220 now. That was pretty egregiously lined in my opinion. So if anyone watching got on that line, shout out to you. I think that was probably the best way to play this fight. Look, I can't really disagree with a lot of what you said about Ribas in terms of stylistic matchup. In terms of buying low on her. One thing I do disagree with, and, honestly, you got to know sometimes the best skill in betting is to know what you're really good at, right? And like for me, I'm good at analyzing the market. I understand stuff like buying low on fighters. I understand, implied probabilities, stuff like that. Like I consider myself in terms of like the data to be very strong as an MMA better, man. Like something that I know that other people are better than me at is determining like who is a better grappler. Like I don't have high level experience. Like I've rolled jujitsu before. I've taken jujitsu classes in my life. I never wrestled at a high level. Like there are people out there who I trust their opinion more than mine. And like, I'm content to admit that. To me, when I go back and watch the tape, man, I think that Jandiroba is the better grappler here. I expect if they grapple for her to have success, but at the same time, like it's not a read that I feel like especially confident in. I'm not going to plant my flag and come out here and say there's an 100% chance that she's going to out grapple Amanda Ribas this weekend. I think I'm going to pick Jandiroba. I'm not sure I'm going to bet her, man. It's still kind of a lukewarm take for me, but I certainly value your opinion in this spot. And I think it's a fun fight to kind of discuss in general. It should be a good matchup. I think kind of flying under the radar this weekend.
I think everybody's pretty much like, from what I've reading and seeing, it's like a split. Like I'm seeing a lot of people on Jandiroba. I am seeing a lot of people on Ribas saying that it is a buy low spot. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting fight for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to I'm not sure if we have a 6-fight main card due to the pay-per-view, but regardless, moving on, it's kind of one of the fights that I would say is on the marquee this weekend. We got Magomed Ankalaev here, who some consider to be the best 205, perhaps an uncrowned champion. Shout out to our boy MMA Lock of the Night. I know Manpreet has been shouting down that Ankalaev is the best 205er in the world for some time, and not necessarily a take I disagree with here, but he is a large favorite this weekend. He's minus 275, taking on Volkan Ozdemir, who comes back plus 215, 7.1K. And I'll go first here, man. I like Magomed Ankalaev a lot as a fighter, man. I think he's one of the better 205ers on the planet. With the emergence of Jiri Prochazka, I'm not ready to say that he's for sure the best one on planet Earth. But I do think that, man, his check hook game is really good. He's able to go to his grappling whenever he wants. I will say that there's kind of some flaws in Ankalaev's game in terms of his output. Like there are times where he's winning fights on very slim margins, man. And there are certain fighters who, in my opinion, shout out to James in the chat, Paul Craig's the best 205er on the planet. You will get no disagreements from me there. I'm a big fan of Bear Jew. But in all seriousness, with Ankalaev, man, there are certain aspects of his game where he wins on very thin margins. He doesn't throw a ton of output. He's not necessarily a guy who's going to spend 4 or 5 minutes in top position during rounds. And there are certain elite fighters, Leon Edwards comes to mind, of guys who are kind of like that in general, where they don't do a ton in terms of their output. It doesn't always look great in terms of what the optics are, but skill-wise, they're kind of able to make up for that in terms of just being so sharp and so efficient with the strikes when they do throw. Magomed Ankalaev, I'm not saying that him and Edwards are like similar fighters in the way they fight, but kind of the prototype they are in terms of what they're able to do to make up for their lack of volume. I think that Ankalaev does a really solid job making up for that lack of volume. His check hook, man, is like, there's like a magnet to your chin, bro. When you're like trying to fight this guy and move forward on him, he counters beautifully with that shot. I will say that Volkan Ozdemir is a guy who might be getting discredited in this spot a little bit. Won round 1 off of Jiri Prochazka, got knocked out in round 2, has obviously fought elite level competition, right? Fought for the belt against a guy in Daniel Cormier, one of the all-time greats, was in there against former champ in Dominic Reyes. Like, he's been in there with the best in this division, and this is a big price tag, but I could see a world where he makes it a close fight, a split decision type fight. But I just kind of think that Ankalaev is better than him, kind of everywhere the game goes. And I do think that if Ankalaev was to grapple, he could look like a minus 400 favorite here. We've seen Ozdemir, decent defensive wrestling. The only guy who really was able to slice through him was DC. I mean, that was a brutal beatdown, but that was a few years ago at this point. We would assume a guy's making improvements. I don't know. I guess I'm rambling at this point, but I think a lot of people think that there's value here in Ozdemir. And I just don't see it personally, my man. I think this is a spot where Ankalaev covered his price. Not getting involved in the betting market myself in terms of a straight money line, but there's people out there on weeks like this where we have so much chalk who are looking at parlay. And I'm not a big parlay player myself, but Magomed Ankalaev is someone who I would not be afraid to kind of throw in those parlay tickets. I do think he gets the job done this weekend. Narco, I kind of seen you smiling throughout the whole breakdown. Are you on the Volkan side here? Are you taking the shot on the big dog?
No, I love Ankalaev. No, I was smiling at the fact that you said, he fights kind of close. I just had kind of a rebuttal. I disagree with that. I don't think he actually fights close. He just outpoints guys so easily or knocks them out. The guy is such a good counter striker. Man, he's lethal. And, comparing the Yuri fight, right? the main difference between Yuri and Ankalaev is much better defensively than Yuri is. Yuri's chin is out there to be hit. We see it in almost every single one of his fights. The guy wants to take a punch so he can land a punch. I mean, he's a wild man, right? So he's not technical in the sense that he's fighting technically sound. And no, Yuri's anything but technical, but he has huge power. He has insane power. And yeah, Ozdemir kind of, I like what I see from Ozdemir. He's not like a terrible fighter, but the main thing here that everybody should be thinking about is how flawed he is defensively. He gets hit a lot.
Yeah.
And against a guy that's very, very technical like Ankalaev's going to catch this guy. Ozdemir is, if he was to grapple, I would say, okay, he's going to give Ankalaev something to think about, but he doesn't really grapple. Ankalaev went to decision last fight in the sense because Krylov gave him a lot of different looks, right? Krylov is kind of wild, switching stances, shooting for takedowns. He was trying to do everything to basically throw Ankalaev's game off. And you know what Ankalaev did later? He started going to his own takedowns to win the fight. So the other thing with this guy is he's very, very cerebral in the ring, really high fight IQ. I like everything I see from this guy. Ozdemir, outside of landing some like big head kick or something, I don't think he wins minutes here.
Yeah.
He's got him covered everywhere. Put him in a parlay. I put him in a parlay a while ago with Chimaev. And I think it was a minus 125 parlay between the two, but I got Chimaev at,
right.
minus 300 way back.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't mind. I don't like doing parlays, like I said, but Ankalaev for me is, as close of a lock as a parlay piece as there is on this card.
Right, and it's not like he's at some astronomical price. Minus 275 is not a price where you're like looking at it and it's like, oh, I can't include that in any place. He's not unbettable. I see a comment from Dan in the chat saying Ankalaev sub plus 2,600. I thought about that myself because I think he might spend some time on top. We've seen Volkov obviously get submitted before. But for some reason, in Ankalaev, I don't think he's ever even attempted a takedown in the UFC, and he spent time on top. He kind of it's like the Curtis Blades thing where it's like hypothetically 25-1 should be value on anyone who's going to spend, more than half a fight in top control potentially. But I'm just not sure like he's going to go to the submissions. It just doesn't seem like you mentioned Narco. He's a very cerebral fighter. Like I don't think he's going to sacrifice. I can almost guarantee he's not going to sacrifice position for a submission attempt. But, it's possible like Volkov gets frustrated, gives his back and just lets him sink in a choke. But do you like that? The sub piece? I know you got your show all about long shots on the Lambo.
Yeah.
Lambo
well he did. I want to say he did land 3 takedowns last fight. So against Krylov, he did go to the takedowns.
Yeah.
So, I think, the fact that this guy, Ozdemir, is so easy to hit, he just might not even bother going to the takedowns and might just light this guy up on the feet. But I think if he does feel like a threat at any point, I think he might go for the takedown. And he's probably the better guy on the ground here. So, I mean, I wouldn't hate plus 2,600 for something like, if it's to happen. But, I mean, it's a long shot, right? You're getting a huge price. So how bad can it be at plus 2,600? If he does get 3 takedowns or 2 takedowns against Ozdemir, can he possibly sub him? Maybe. But the other issue is this guy's never won by sub in his career.
Yeah.
So does he actually go for subs is the issue, or does he just sit there and ground and pound you?
Yeah, well, look, it's MMA. It's 26-1. I'm certainly not going to try to talk anybody out of it, but not a play that I ended up making myself, despite the fact that I did take a look earlier this week. Let's move on to a next fight with a fighter who, aforementioned parlay piece for you this week, NarcoCop. We got the return of Hamza Chimaya. He's been out of the cage, had a bad case of COVID. He's missed like the last 13 months after that UFC kind of debut stretch where he put together 3 finishes in dominant fashion. He's up to a minus 650 favorite this weekend, so congratulations to you on your minus 300 parlay piece. Certainly got ahead of the market move there, my friend. He's 9.5K on DraftKings, second most expensive fighter on the slate behind Islam Makhachev, who we'll get to in a minute. He fights Li Jinliang this weekend, plus 425 for the Leech, 6.7K on DraftKings. And this is another one I can keep kind of short, man. I think a lot of people who have been absorbing my content for the last, year plus since this guy was fighting, I'm not sold on Hamza Chimaya being some like lock to be champion the way a lot of people are. I certainly think he's skilled. Like I almost laid minus 300 with him in his UFC debut before we'd even seen him in the cage. Like, and I don't do that often. I know I talked about that with Durav earlier. Like, I certainly think he's a special talent, but there are unproven parts of his game, man. Like, he hasn't been extended a ton. We haven't seen him really get in a prolonged striking fight, but stylistically, I mean, he's an elite wrestler at this point. Li Jinliang, someone who historically has struggled with takedowns. I think his takedown defense sub 60% at this point in his career. I was looking to fade Hamza with a more proven guy like Leon Edwards, but it's not that I think he's bad necessarily. It's just there's so many questions. It was hard for me to see him as a favorite over more proven guys. But I think he deserves this price, man. Like, this is a really good matchup. Leach has struggled historically here. I think Chimaev gets him down. I think he dominates the fight. I think he's kind of the best projected play on the DraftKings board, expecting to win inside the distance and kind of accumulate all types of points as he does it. So I know you have a parlay piece here, Narco, so I don't know how much time you want to spend kind of talking through it, but minus 650 now for Chimaev. Like, you expect him to cover that price with relative ease here?
I think so. Honestly, I'm like everybody else is, I guess, very high on this guy. Yeah, the question marks are there as far as the COVID. The other thing I do want to mention is people have to realize that now this fight is at 170, man, and this guy's like blasting guys at 185. I mean, how good does that win against Mearshart look with the one punch knockout after that fight against Muradov, right? Mearshart beat Muradov, and now Chimaev's one punch, KO looks even better against Mearshart because, man, this guy is just extremely powerful, dude. And now he's going down to 170. Again, the only question is he's been out for a while. The COVID, the cardio, how is it going to look because of COVID? But I just think he's going to smash Jiang Li. I know Jiang Li has a nice, counter left hook or whatever it is, but man, like, I think Chimaev just does whatever he wants with this guy. And I think the smart route is to grapple, right? Take this guy down. Do not mess around on the feet. I think he knows that. I think he's just going to take him down. And what's Liang going to do once he's down there, man? I mean, this guy is very
gauge. That's what
I mean, this guy is very, very heavy on top, man. I did take a small poke on the KO line just because it was a better line than the submission at plus 170. But yeah, I mean, this guy is, he's the real deal. If his cardio is there and he's not torn up from COVID, people are pretty much screwed in this division for the most part. I'm not going to crown him because there's some really good guys and really good grapplers at 170, but he's a force.
Yeah, I agree. He's a force. Maybe I'm going to hold off on the fade till he gets to the Usman level, assuming that Kamaru is still fighting. I don't know if I'd be able to pick him in that match, but I think there's a few guys that Chimaev is a dog to at this point at 170, but this is not a spot that I really think should really have any trouble for him. So I expect him to win here. We got a comment before we move on to the next fight. Beardless Mearshart would wreck Boris, though. I mean, he says he's joking, but I cashed on GM3 against Muradov. I bet GM3. I had some tweets that aged poorly about GM3 against Chimaev, but you won't ever hear me hating on Gerald Mearshart. He's one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. We got 4 fights left here in Narco on the main card for UFC 267 going down on Saturday night. We will go to the heavyweight division here. We got Alexander Volkov as a pretty big favorite here, minus 280, 8.9K against Marcin Tybura, who comes back plus 240, 7.3K. And I finally have a bet that I've already put in, a bet that is on the board. And I actually laid the chalk here. I bet Alexander Volkov minus 275 to win 1 unit. I think it's good till about minus 300. And man, I have to give some respect to Marcin Tybura because this is a guy who a lot of us wrote off as being chinny, someone who was, had lost multiple fights in a row in the UFC, was really struggling at one point, has put together a nice win streak. But I think if we take a step back here and we talk about buying low on guys, it sounds weird to say we're buying low on a guy like Alexander Volkov at a minus 275 price. But look, the guy's coming off probably the 2 toughest matchups that he could possibly have at 265 pounds. in my opinion, Volkov is probably the second or third most talented guy in terms of pure talent at heavyweight. And of course, at heavyweight, that's a division with a lot of variance, right? Like Francis Ngannou, I don't think is the most technically sound guy in the world, but obviously he's a dominant force at heavyweight with his fight-ending power. But when you look at Volkov, man, the two toughest matchups for him, I think, are Blades, who put him on his back like 14 times, and then Cyril Gane, who's just a better version of Alexander Volkov with some grappling mixed in. You know what I mean? Like, I think he has fought the two toughest fights he can, and now he gets a matchup here against Marcin Tybura, which I really think is favorable for him. You know, I respect Tybura for putting together a win streak, but a lot of his win streak, man, is kind of on facing heavyweights who don't know how to grapple. Like Walt Harris piecing him up, hurt him bad, kind of falls down. Tybura catches a kick, is able to get him down, get him out of there on the ground. Similar situation in the Greg Hardy fight. You know, you look at Marcin Tybura's striking stats at distance, man, and I know there's a split in the MMA community about stats, but I do think there's kind of a middle ground. I mean, man, the last time that he really outstruck someone at distance was Derek Lewis in 2018. And like everyone outstrikes Derek Lewis. Like this is a guy in Tybura who almost never wins at distance. I believe he actually outstruck Ben Rothwell, but that was due to him gassing out in that spot. And then the one thing that I think the path for Tybura, man, is he's going to land takedowns here to win the fight, or is going to have to. And Alexander Volkov, I know his takedown defense statistically is not the greatest thing you've ever seen. I'll pull it up right now. He has his takedown defense is 67%. But you take out the Curtis Blades fight, man, this guy stuffed 30 out of 35 attempted takedowns on him throughout his UFC career. That includes fighting guys like Fabricio Werdum. Like he's fought good grapplers. Cyril Gane, he's stuffing takedowns against. So it's like, I just don't think that Tybura is going to be able to take him down. And Volkov is so skilled, even at a division like heavyweight with so much variance, 4-ounce gloves, big guys fighting. Volkov is someone who I love when he has these steps down in competition. I bet him big. I had the under against Walt Harris. It's just like, if you're not as skilled as this guy or don't have the ability to put him on his butt, you're going to be in big trouble. So I know it's a long-winded way of saying I'm laying some chalk, but I do really think this is a great matchup for Alexander Volkov. I laid it at minus 275. Narco, anything for you here on this main card heavyweight matchup?
Great breakdown, dude. That's all I can say. Yeah, Tybura's been on a great run, 5 wins in a row. We wrote him off and all that good stuff. But there's levels to this game. And, Tybura's going to a different level now. Speaking of takedown defense, Alexander Volkov has very, very good takedown defense. I don't care what the percentage is. That is skewed based on the fight with Curtis Blades. But go back and watch that fight. He had Curtis Blades in deep trouble late in that fight after Curtis Blades landed 14 takedowns, right? He had him in big trouble late, and Volkov is going to get up. Volkov is not going to lay there. And Marcin Tybura is, he's got decent takedowns, but again, there's levels to this stuff. And when you're getting put on your back by Curtis Blades, that guy is an insane wrestler compared to Tybura. Tybura, honestly, this is what you said is 100% correct. This is a buy low spot, even though it's minus 270, 300. What I do love in this spot, and I like it a lot, is the Volkov KO at plus 125. Because if this stays on the feet, Volkov is absolutely going to plaster this guy. And, this guy's been knocked out before, more than once. I want to say he's been knocked out 4 or 5 times.
At least 4 times that I can, off the top of my head, I think.
And we're talking about a powerful, huge guy in Volkov that, whether it's one punch or not, this guy accumulates on you, and he's heavy and he's big and he's putting guys out, So I don't see, Tybura landing a lot of takedowns if he does, and I don't see him holding him down if he is to take get a takedown, because again, Curtis Blades couldn't hold this guy down. This guy kept getting up. What makes me think Tybura is going to hold him down, even if he does land a takedown? So you're 100% right. I love Volkov. Even as a parlay piece, Volkov is good here. But again, plus money KO. I like it.
Yeah, I think it's a solid way to approach the fight here. It's just a spot where I feel like there's a clear skill gap where the fight is more likely to kind of take place. So I laid the chalk here. Let's move on. Speaking of chalk, let's talk about the biggest price fighter on the entire slate here. I forgot to change the banner, but we got Islam Makhachev. He's a minus 700 favorite here against Dan the Hangman Hooker comes back plus 450. Obviously, taking this fight coming off of a win against Nasrat Haqparast about a month ago here. Islam's minus 700, Hooker plus 450. DK prices, Islam 9.6K, most expensive fighter on the DK slate. As expected, Dan Hooker $6.6 thousand. And Narco, there's been a lot of talk throughout the community about, Islam Makhachev being the best 155er on the planet. And I'll come out here right now and say, I would favor this guy tomorrow against a guy like Dustin Poirier. I'd favor him against the champion in Charles Oliveira, and everyone knows how much of a Charles Oliveira fanboy I am. I think that this guy is the best 155er on the planet. I think his wrestling is elite. He pressures beautifully. I just think that this guy is kind of the complete package. However, man, plus 450 on a guy like Dan Hooker is enticing to me for at least a half unit sprinkle. There was a plus 500 earlier in the week. I do think that this price potentially will blow out back to plus 500. I'm going to wait to bet it. But I just kind of think the breakdown is simple here, man, for Dan Hooker. He's a solid top 5 to 10 lightweight on planet Earth who is not totally lost in the grappling realm. He has pretty good jiu-jitsu himself. I'm not saying – I did actually have a dream the other day. I'm not going to lie. I had a dream that Hooker subbed him. I literally dreamed this. I got it. I might have to throw $50 on the Hooker sub. It's 35 to 1. Hooker is has decent jiu-jitsu, and I'm not saying he's going to out-grapple Makhachev because he definitely isn't. But if you just think about it conceptually, top 5 to top 10 lightweight, not totally lost in the grappling, has the ability to stuff 1 or 2 takedowns, and his best strike is a knee up the middle, man. How much more do you need to bet plus 500 in a cage fight? So all the respect from me to Islam Makhachev, I do think he is a truly elite special talent, but plus 500 on a guy like Dan Hooker, it might be time to burn the boats, my friend, and get on a little half unit stab here, plus 500. Anything for you, Narco? Am I lighting money on fire here betting Dan Hooker? Because it kind of feels a little bit like that, but I do think there's some value. Plus 500 is just such a crazy price, man.
Yeah, I mean, minus 700 is insane. We kind of discussed it. Poirier against Hooker a couple of fights ago was minus 220. Okay. Put that in perspective. I know they're different fighters. I know Poirier doesn't grapple like Makhachev does, but I don't care. It's kind of disrespectful to have a minus 700 here against like you said, a top 10 guy in Hooker, who's one of his main things here is his knee up the middle, and Makhachev is going to be shooting takedowns. I know his timing is good. I know everything about, he's smart. He puts his head in the right places. The other thing I want to mention with Hooker that you kind of didn't mention is the fact that he has a really, really nasty guillotine with very long arms, right? So, I know Makhachev for the most part is safe when it comes to shooting the takedowns. But again, that could be another thing. Just, like you said, a submission at plus 2,800, 3,000. He's got a good BJJ game, but is he going to be put on his back? I'm pretty sure he is.
Yeah.
The question is he going to be able to get up? Is he going to be able to make Makhachev work or catch him? One thing I will mention is very, very important is if he just doesn't land it or just catches him with a knee one time, it will make Makhachev think twice. And he's probably still going to shoot, but he's not going to be as relentless, because you got to be careful at that point, because if you felt it one time, if it buzzed you even and didn't catch you clean, just as a fighter, your instinct is to be more careful and not shoot as often as you probably will if you never catch that knee to begin with. So ultimately, what I'm saying is minus 700, guys, is too big. Please don't lay that in parlays. Don't do any of that stuff. I actually don't really like Makhachev in the upper 9,000 range compared to these other guys, because I think his finishing upside compared to Chimaev or Durav is not as good, because I like Durav to finish and Chimaev to finish more than him. So if you're playing DraftKings, I probably would choose those guys over Makhachev. I mean, if you're putting 150 lineups in, you obviously can't fade this guy. But, one thing that did stick out to me with Makhachev is that elite, defensive striking, man. He's elite, dude. Mm-hmm. I looked over the stats. The most anybody has landed on this guy, Jonah, 13 punches.
Yeah.
He's been 3 rounds or more 6 times. And the most you can land on this guy is 13 punches.
Yeah.
I mean, his defensive skills are amazing. So is he the best 155 in the planet? I wouldn't say so. I think there's other people out there that can probably give him problems. I don't want to discount my boy Benil because I love him.
I do love Benil as well.
But Benil's gas tank is the only thing that would worry me in a fight against Makhachev. But yeah, for me, Makhachev round 3 decision. Shout out to my boy Danny Lags. He put that out there. I like that line. I think it's like a small minus number, minus 130, I want to say. Is not a bad look because I don't think he finishes Hooker early on. Hooker's too smart and good of a fighter to get finished very early.
Yeah, I agree with you there. So it sounds like we're both on the Hooker side here. I'm not picking him to win the fight, obviously, the minus 700. I do expect to get the job done, but just from a pure value standpoint, in terms of betting over the long run here, I think you probably do make money betting Dan Hooker, but sometimes with just these trains you don't want to step in front of. I feel like Makhachev might be one, but the line is just inflated, man. I do think that Dan Hooker is worthy of a bet. Half unit, quarter unit, whatever you feel comfortable this weekend. You obviously don't need to go all in on the guy because there's a solid chance he gets dominated. But to me, it's certainly a spot where I do think there's some value here on Dan Hooker. All right, we have done 13 fights here for UFC 267. We got 2 left to go, my man Narco. We got 2 title fights. We'll kick it off here with the bantamweights fighting for the interim strap as the real champ, the king of the world, the man I cashed a big bet on due to a blatantly illegal strike. Aljamain Sterling sits at home, and we have Petr Yan as a minus 210 favorite in this spot. He takes on Corey Sandhagen plus 180 for Corey Sandhagen. Shout out to CU where Corey Sandhagen went to school, graduated. I'm repping the shirt for him today. He comes in as an underdog here, 7.4K on DK. Yan is 8.8K. And man, I think this is an interesting stylistic matchup, Narco, because something that I've kind of always said when it comes to the top 3 at 135 pounds, and I make jokes about my guy Aljo, but I truly think that the top 3 fighters at 135 pounds are Aljamain Sterling, Corey Sandhagen, and Petr Yan. And I think it's like this love triangle almost where each one of them is the toughest matchup for the other one. Like I think that Aljo will always be the toughest matchup for Corey, man. Corey gives his back so often. Aljo is able to dominate from those positions. I think that Petr will always be the toughest matchup for Aljo. He's a great counter wrestler. He has much more power, but I kind of think that Sandhagen may always be the toughest matchup for Petr Yan because he's decent first level takedown defense. He's extremely rangy, and I think he's going to be able to strike with this guy at least early on in the fight and take rounds off of him. So I'm going to let you go first with your breakdown, Narco. Give your pick if you have any bet on the fight, but I'm certainly intrigued by the underdog here. I'll give my official play after you go, but I'm curious what you think here for the bantamweight strap between Petr Yan and Corey Sandhagen.
Yeah, I mean, I like both guys. I bet Sandhagen last fight versus Dillashaw, and in a close fight. But for me, I love Petr Yan, man. The guy just breaks people, and that's what he goes out there to do, man. The pressure, the pressure this guy brings, the striking, and how strong this guy is. When he gets you down, the ground and pound is extremely nasty. Yeah, this guy doesn't grapple a lot, but in that 5th round against Aldo, man, did he put a beating on Aldo, and the cardio, man. Look at this guy. This guy can go 5 hard rounds, and not to take anything away from Sandhagen, he's got very good cardio. Look at the last fight against Dillashaw, an absolute war, dude, for 5 rounds. But the one thing I don't like that Sandhagen does is giving up his back all the time. People seem to think that Yan might not take him down if he gets. Why not? He might. He actually might take him, sweep that leg, and take him down. And Dillashaw got him down and did some damage. But I will say something: Yan is a lot more dangerous when he's on top and throwing his ground and pound than Dillashaw is. And the other thing on the flip side, I want to say that Sandhagen's knees are dangerous. I mean, his kicks are dangerous. This guy is a dangerous striker, really long. I like everything that he does, but the one thing I think people need to look at it's a big thing that stuck out to me is when Dillashaw was pressuring, he had a lot of success against Sandhagen. Yeah. And what does Yan do all the time? He pressures. He doesn't really go back on the back foot. So I think that's where Sandhagen is going to have problems, is that Jan is going to constantly bring that pressure in this fight. And Sandhagen just doesn't fight the same when he's backing up. And that's where, ultimately I'm not laying 210, I'll be honest, because I think the line is just about right here. I do see a pretty closely contested fight, but I think down the stretch, Jan takes over, man. And to be honest, Dillashaw kind of was taken over, in a close fight, last fight against Sandhagen. So Jan's pressure is completely different, and it just breaks people. So I don't know, man. It's a very good fight. I'm going to sit on my couch and have my drink and probably not have a single bet on this fight, but I'm going to be loving every minute of it.
Yeah, and I think there's nothing wrong with that, man. I don't think this is like a must-bet spot per se. I will say, I bet Corey Sandhagen. I bet him at plus 205 last night. I took him for a unit. My reasoning here is I just think that Sandhagen kind of provides some issues for Jan early on in the fight. Petr Yan is someone who, for me, I think he's borderline a top 5 pound-for-pound guy in the sport. Certainly top 15, probably top 10. Like, I think he's just kind of elite all around. Less proven than Alexander Volkanovski, but kind of a similar guy where he just durable guy, good cardio, can wrestle a little bit offensively, doesn't have any glaring holes in his games. Like he's just a solid all-around fighter. I think Petr Yan is a dangerous guy, but he concedes early rounds sometimes, and he's a little bit low volume. We look at the Jimmy Rivera fight, and I think sometimes stuff like this is kind of a little bit overstated. You look at the Aljamain Sterling fight, you could look at the strikes, and you say, well, he was getting outstruck, but he landed a knockdown, which only won him the round. Like at this point, man, like his power is pretty kind of repeatable, right? Like he consistently is winning these rounds late by knocking people down to the point where I think it's kind of okay to say, like, yeah, he has close rounds sometimes, but he's reliable to have these big moments kind of often in fights. But for me, man, like Sandhagen, I think is going to win the first round. I think he's like a minus 200 favorite in the first round, to be honest. Like I think that Jan kind of concedes early rounds in the fight. He goes to that high guard. I think Corey will kind of rip to the body. He does decent work in that regard. I just think, man, you're getting plus 200 on a guy who I favor to win the first round, a guy who I know isn't going to gas out. And I do think that Jan is going to have wrestling success. That's kind of where I differ from a lot of people who are betting Sandhagen. I think that Jan's going to be able to take him down. But for as flawed as Corey is in terms of giving his back defensively, he's very dangerous offensively off of his back. And I'm not betting the guy because I think he's going to land a triangle off his back or something. But we even saw in the Petr Yan fight against Aljo, and this is partially because he was piecing him up on the feet. I don't think Jan is like super confident in his top game avoiding jiu-jitsu guys. Like he did not get on top of Aljo for prolonged periods of time. Like he's trying to avoid those situations kind of often. And like even against Aldo, he went to the takedown kind of late in the fight once Aldo was gassing out. Like I do think that Corey's going to make it difficult. Corey lost his last fight basically on control. But the one thing I will say, if he's the reason that TJ Dillashaw isn't fighting this weekend because he fucked his knee up in a scramble situation. Like Sandhagen, I hate when fighters play off their back, and I don't think it's good in terms of winning minutes, but like he's not a guy who you want to mess with. So I think that Jan could have some situations where he succeeds in the wrestling, but it's not prolonged, right? Like he might get a trip and then let Corey back up, or a trip and 30 seconds of control sort of deal. So I think that, it's just enough value for me to make a play on Corey Sandhagen. These are two elite strikers. I'm really excited to see how it plays out. I think there's no issue in like having a beverage and just watching the fight as a pure fan of the sport. I'm really looking forward to this one come Saturday morning.
Yeah, I don't mind your bet at all at plus 180. Like I said, I'm just staying away. I think these 5 rounders just favor Jan over almost anybody in this division.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great fighter over 5 round. His attritional work is truly tremendous. Corey is there to be leg kicked, there to be hit to the body a little bit as well. So, look, I think it's a great matchup. I'm obviously looking forward to it. I think there's enough value to squeeze out a Sandhagen bet, but not like a must-bet spot, I think, per se. Let's move on here. We've done 14 fights, one more left, my man Narco. We're just under 90 minutes here. I think we've done a good job kind of managing the time. We got Jan Blachowicz versus Glover Teixeira for the light heavyweight strap. Blachowicz defending his title, coming off of a win against Israel Adesanya, obviously. And Glover Teixeira turned 42 years old today. The man has had a late career resurgence, fighting for the belt. I put out a tweet, man. I can't even remember what my tweet was, of how many days it had been since Glover Teixeira first fought John Jones for the belt in 2014. It will have been, come Saturday, 2,774 days since this guy fought for a UFC title, climbed his way all the way back to the belt, really looking forward to this matchup, man. It's not necessarily a fight where like all of your casual friends are going to be talking about it, but I think in terms of the people who like appreciate these athletes over the long term and have watched their whole careers, man, like this is a great moment for Glover, and Jan Blachowicz is obviously someone who's proven himself to be nothing short of elite as champion at this point. He's put together a really strong resume. Big favorite here. I think I expect him to be a big favorite at minus 275. Narco, do you have a play on the main event here? Because I think like there's a case to be made. Blachowicz has been super proven recently. Glover's gotten close to getting finished in a lot of his wins, right? He's getting knocked down, coming back. But at the same time, man, plus 270, plus 250 out there for Glover Teixeira. It's a dangerous guy at a big price point. Anything for you? I'll let you go first here in the main event. Any action on your end?
No action for me. I think the line's a little bit too wide. But going back and watching Teixeira, like he's like knocked out in so many of these fights and then comes back to win. Like he's coming back from the dead in a lot of these fights recently. And it's like this guy is like, out for 1 second and then back the next, and then kind of like grinding these guys down and then eventually getting them out of there. I just don't see that happening with, Jan here. Jan's skilled. Jan has very good leg kicks. Jan has good BJJ. Very, very strong. I don't think that he's going to gas here, because go back and looking at Teixeira's wins, these guys are gassing in the fifth, in the third, in his fight against, I believe it was Santos. He was completely gassed. Anthony Smith, completely done after the second or third round, whatever it was. So, but like, if you're going to play the Teixeira side, I think I like submission, man. I know Jan is, a BJJ black belt, but we always say one thing, like there's levels to this shit. And Teixeira is a different level of practitioner than he is. Just scrolling through who he's fought, I know he survived Souza, but that's really the only good grappler like he's faced. Go back and look, like that's the only guy. And Teixeira, this is 5 rounds. We've seen him go 5 rounds. We've seen him get late stoppages. If Jan gets tired and Teixeira's able to land takedowns while he's tired, that sub is even more live. And look, I mean, the line is ridiculous to me. It's 750 plus 750 for a guy that's extremely, extremely dangerous on the ground, man. And I mean, if you're playing that side, I kind of like the submission a lot. I don't think he's going to win a lot of minutes here, especially early. But maybe late if Jan tires or blows his gas thing trying to knock this guy out at some point or has him hurt like a lot of these other fighters. But overall, I'm going to take Jan to win this fight, but I like the submission prop on Teixeira.
Yeah, I think the submission's interesting. It's interesting that it's priced kind of the same as KO. Obviously the KO is always a threat because you're either on the feet or ground and pound. But at the same time, I think the bigger kind of stylistic advantage for Glover in this fight, we would all agree, is the submission. So it's interesting kind of that they're priced similarly in the current market. I actually bet Glover here at plus 270 on FanDuel. It might have been plus 275. I'll pull that up right now just for transparency purposes. But I did get a bet on him. I'm going to pick Jan, but you mentioned the Jacare fight, and that wasn't a fight that I would say Jan struggled in, but he got tied up against the fence, right? There was not a lot of moments where he was able to show off that power. And I think I think it was like 9 minutes of control for Jacare in that fight. If you give a guy like Glover 9 minutes of control, I actually think he has the wrestling to get the fight to the ground, right? Like we talked about BJJ, and obviously like his BJJ is elite, but his recovery is always also elite, and his takedowns are also solid for this weight class, right? Like this is a guy who he has gotten real close to getting finished a bunch of times. Obviously, there's no denying that. And I do think that he's going to have more trouble getting Jan down while he's rocked than he is some of these other guys. Like we've seen him, like this guy is on the brink of getting knocked down and is just able to land a blast double. Like I don't know if he's going to be able to do that against Jan, but like if he's fully conscious, like press him against the cage, making him like tie up in the fight, I do think that there's paths for Glover here. I just think the number is too wide. Wouldn't be surprised if he gets knocked down in the first round, but I'm rooting for him as a fan, and I also have some money behind him at a plus 270 price tag that I just thought was too wide, and I actually think the price is still available. Yep, FanDuel's got the best price in the market, plus 270, so I would advise going out and grabbing some of that. It is one of the 3 spots I'm on already. I'll likely add another play or 2 this weekend. That is all 15 fights we just went over for UFC 267. Shout out to John, who wasn't able to make it tonight. He will actually be in the building for UFC 267. Should be back next week. But Narco, my man, I appreciate you coming on the show. Real quick, or not even real quick, take your time. Tell people where can they find you on Twitter. Tell them where they can find you on YouTube, your shows, all that stuff. It was a great time talking fights with you. So plug whatever you want, and then I will take us out of here, my man.
Thanks for having me, Jonah. Yeah, you guys can find me, NarcoCop on Twitter, NarcoCopMMA on YouTube. I have a show tomorrow. It's called the Lambeau Place Podcast. It's at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. Tomorrow, actually, I'll reveal it here because I haven't revealed it on Twitter yet. But I have a special guest. It's going to be me and Tajik, and then a special guest, Mo Miller from the Dana White's Contender Series, the MMA fighter. He's going to be on the show tomorrow. He's going to talk some stuff about the fights. I don't know if he's going to actually be given the plus 300 Lambeau plays. We're going to take care of that end, but he's going to give his insight on the fighters and the fights. So it should be very interesting. It's going to be fun. Come on out tomorrow, 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. It's NarcoCopMMA. And I also have my Dana White's Contender Series show on Monday. It's going to be the finale. We've actually been winning just about every single week. This week, I had a small win. Some of those unders did not come in, but as far as the whole series overall, I've been absolutely crushing it. So, yeah, please come out on Monday, that is, at 9 p.m. for the Dana White's Contender Series show. Thank you again, Jonah. Thank you to John. And, yeah, I had a great time.
But you guys can find Narco. I don't know if you plug this, but your Twitter is just at NarcoCop, that the YouTube where you can find both your shows. Thank you for coming on and talking. Thank you guys for listening. In terms of my stuff, you can find it on ftndaily.com, ftnbets.com for free. As always, speaking of special guests, we got Mo Miller going on the Lambeau Parlay show tomorrow. I'm having UFC play-by-play announcer Brendan Fitzgerald on this show, the Undisputed Show, later this week. You guys can find me on Twitter. I put together a thread. If we have any questions for Brandon Fitzgerald about MMA betting in general, I'm going to take some of the best ones and ask him there. But that should do it for us. As all 15 fights for UFC 267. John should be back next week, and I'll do my best impression of him for now because that is Narco. I am Jonah. This has been the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you next week.